I do know some things that are happening perhaps at universities where there are far more girls than boys, or women than men. What happens in those institutions, this is what it looks like anyways, possibly. So females are hypergamous, which means they'll mate across and up hierarchies, socioeconomic hierarchy, but competence hierarchy is really at the bottom of it. And so when you set up a situation where there's far more women than there are men in a given domain, say where mate selection can take place, most of the men still don't do very well because most of them are still rejected by women. But a small minority of men do extraordinarily well if you think well means unlimited sexual access. And so what's happening in the universities is that a small minority of men have sexual carte blanche in some sense. And most men are in the same position that most young men are always in, which is they're in a state where they're not particularly desirable to women. And then the women, of course, are terribly frustrated because the minority of men that they would really like to have long-term relationships with, it's a seller's market for those men.
They're not settling down. That's the sex ratio hypothesis.
Yeah.
And the reverse happens, right? That you see whoever the more scarce sex is gets to determine the rules of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So the men, if they are in high demand because there's short supply, you get more short-term mating.
Yeah.
You get an increase in relationship dissatisfaction from women. And when the reverse happens, you get more dates before sex. You get more long-term mating. You also get more sexual violence in that situation as well, when there is a surplus of men and a scarcity of women. I think there's
also get far more unstable societies. You know, I was pilloried a few years back for my comments about enforced monogamy because they were taken out of context and twisted in exactly the way that things like that get twisted now. But
you guys know what he's talking about with the enforced monogamy?
One of the cures for like the incel culture would be to have enforced monogamy. Because I guess the logic behind that is because women have choice and they tend to be hypergamous, the majority of guys aren't getting any type of action or attention, so that's making them incels and more violent. So the solution to that would be enforced monogamy. That way it could be distributed more evenly.
Okay.
One human universal is the construction of societies to both mandate and reward monogamy. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. It's because it's the best long-term solution fundamentally. But one of the reasons for that is that when women are scarce, men get violent. Now, you know, that was read to say, well, I thought that the society should be distributing women to undeserving men, which is, of course, absolutely and utterly preposterous and bears no relationship whatsoever to anything I ever said or thought, or anything anyone sane would ever think or say, or has ever thought or said. Because I don't know anyone politically ever who was insane enough to think that the state should distribute women to men. Like, that's just never happened. So to be accused of that belief and then for that to, you know, be put forward as a credible representation of what I thought was just one of the preposterous things that has happened to me.
It's an unfortunate name, enforced monogamy, because it's a term from anthropology, right? But what you mean is culturally celebrated monogamy, culturally and norms that are supporting people and raising that up as an institution.
Supporting and punishing, both, but mostly supporting. I mean, the punishing is that there's a moral disapproval applied to, say, cheating, right, to adultery.
I agree. Honestly, I agree with that. I think if you're gonna get married, man, you got to be about it. You feel me? Like, don't be half-assed in it, because you out here on the altar talking about, you know, till death do us part, through sickness and through health and all that stuff. But then you go ahead and then you go against your word. Like, that's not cool. But people could argue that, well, that's why I'm not going to get married in the first place. But then it's like, no, you're not getting the point. You should get married. And then it's like, okay, but if I get married, I have to commit myself. Yes, you have to commit yourself. Well, I don't want to commit myself. I want to be single and I want to do whatever I want.
Some people, like, they just like don't take well to listening to like authorities. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like maybe
anything
like
that has the word enforced in it just
enforcing
sounds bad.
It's like I don't even want to be about it. You know what I mean? That's gonna be an outlier.
Yeah, I believe we already have enforced monogamy in terms of like how the laws are set up, how the social norms are set up. It's not like people are praising cheating today, or like
You
people
sure
might
about that?
be
You be on
people might
TikTok?
be
I,
yeah,
I, I would, I would disagree, man.
praising cheating.
I would
People
disagree,
expose their
man.
boyfriend on TikTok
That is true. That is
for
true.
for cheating.
Oh, that's a good point, though. That's a good point.
but mostly supporting. I mean, the punishing is that there's a moral disapproval applied to, say, cheating, right, to adultery, to especially running around behind your partner's back if you're married, particularly that. But even if you're in a long-term stable relationship, it's like, well, that's all enforcement. It's not police with jackboots, but that's not the only type of enforcement. It's not the only type of sanction or threat or punishment or disappropriation or disgust or contempt or shame or frustration or disappointment, all of those things. And all of that, because monogamy is a good long-term solution, but in some sense a troublesome short-term solution if you have other options, then all of those elements of social support, let's say, need to be put into place. And that is it, as far as I've been able to determine by looking at the anthropological literature. Norms surrounding monogamy are a human universal. There are exceptions, but there are very specific situational reasons for those exceptions.
What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that,
Yeah, I think there's.
He's been defending this for some time, because like that's 3 different videos we saw where he was defending that same that same quote. I feel like in general, it's still like taboo to have multiple partners at once, but I feel like the shift hasn't been from monogamy to polygamy. I think it's been from monogamy where like you're married to your high school sweetheart for like 60, 70 years, to you're monogamous but with like people in series, you know what I'm saying? Like 2-year relationship, 6-month relationship. Like that's the main difference, but it's still, you're still aiming for that monogamy.
Especially women. I think women are definitely aiming for that.
Yeah.
That's something that's
Climbing
definitely
game.
innate. I agree that is definitely an innate, for women to want to have innate monogamous relationship, and that's why they seek for the best man, because it's hard to find even one high value man. So to look for 2 high value men, it wouldn't make sense for a woman to be desperate for that type of thing, unless women just degrade themselves to the point where they're not focusing on the value of the man. Other factors like sexual pleasure, what's it called, novelty, all that stuff that comes into play when it comes to sexual liberation. So
Women aren't naturally wired for themselves to be polygamous,
I agree.
because they can only have 1 child at a time, and then
Mm-hmm.
it only takes 1 high value guy to take care of you. You wouldn't need 2 to take care of 1 person. You know what I'm saying?
All right, y'all. That was it for this video. Like, subscribe, notification bell. Catch you on the next one. Peace.